Well, tonight we'll stay in our region, heading over to East Ramapo, New York, where the state-appointed fiscal monitor is calling for legislative intervention after citing a series of discrepancies and examples of non-compliance with state standards within the controversial school district. Why the monitor says it is time for the state to take over. And all is quiet in Ferguson, Missouri as we speak, as people await that grand jury decision surrounding the police-related death of 18-year-old Michael Brown. Governor, he's got the National Guard on standby just in case chaos erupts. Is that the right move? We'll ask our table. Plus, we'll have a look at the humorous side of politics. Author Rich Rubino shares some of the funniest quotes from his new book, The Political Bible of Humorous Quotations in American Politics. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you so much for joining us. And tonight, we will start in East Ramapo in Rockland County, New York. It is located 30 miles north of New York City, and the school district's administration, which is run by Orthodox Jewish and Hasidic men, they've been under intense scrutiny for allegedly misappropriating school resources to the benefit of the district's private schools. Christina Chiarelli, she reports on a review released this week by the state-appointed fiscal monitor.
Issues have been following around the East Ramapo School District for years, but this 61-page report spells them out. In the report, attorney Hank Greenberg says the school board appears to favor Orthodox Jewish students who go to private schools. He's calling on the state legislature and the governor to appoint someone to oversee the district's public schools, and that person should have the power to overrule any bad decisions made by the board.
Ultimately, we can hide behind religion versus privilege.
According to the report, there's 9,000 children who go to public schools. 91% are African American, Latino, or Haitian. 24,000 go to private school, almost all attending 52 yeshivas.
We're addressing the religious ideologies, tradition versus issue, and that's where the battle has been lost. Deal with the real issues.
Since 2005, the majority of the school board has been Orthodox Jewish residents who send their children to private schools. In 2009, the report says the board made drastic spending cuts to public school programs to balance its budget, an estimated $30 to $40 million, while millions were fed into private school programs.
We need to have really a neutral view. To make sure that no matter what child there is, whether it's a child that's in the public school system or the private school system, that they're getting the education that they deserve and they need.
In response, the board's president said in a statement, "While we were uncomfortable with some of the characterizations in Mr. Greenberg's report, we are hopeful that it will lead to real progress for the children of the district." Now, the report makes several suggestions. One, that the state needs to provide more funding, but it's not just about the money. The report also says the private school community needs to understand the pain and anger in the public school community and ultimately work together. In Spring Valley, Christina Chiarelli, FiOS 1 News.
And thank you, Christina. Now, today, Assemblywoman Ellen Jaffe announced plans to introduce legislation that would give that state appointee power to reject decisions made by the school board and superintendent. In fact, Ms. Greenberg, he spoke out to Journal News about the report and the district's financial mismanagement.
It is unthinkable that the state would give an extra penny to this district unless there are legal assurances that that money is fairly and reasonably allocated when it gets to the district.
All right, I want to bring our panel here. Tom Doherty, Republican strategist, partner at Mercury, and a former advisor to New York Governor George Pataki. C. Scott Vanderhoef, he is attorney and former Rockland County executive many times over. And Dominic Carter, political journalist and author, and by the way, Rockland resident. Scott, you're probably the best guy to talk to about this because not only as former county exec, this story's been festering for a while, but also your wife is a teacher in the school system as well, so she's got as good a first-hand account as anybody. Was this long overdue, what happened today?
I think so. And I think if you talk to the teachers and you talk to the parents, I think you'd get that response. And of course the question, I mean, and I think the study probably was muted in many respects. This monitor is going to have to take a very aggressive posture, I think. But it's a volatile situation. I mean, folks are pointing fingers at each other, saying it's a racial issue, and they're pointing fingers and saying it's a religious issue. And as indicated in the report, you've got 9,000 students who are being in the public school system who are primarily Latino, Haitian, of color, and you have 24,000 students who are in the private system who are getting paid, or getting money reimbursed for busing, for disabled kinds of things, and they're exploiting to that extent. And that's what this report says, is that, you know, they're using those funds. But the most damning thing is that the board simply was reckless in spending. I mean, that's true of any board, regardless of your makeup. And that's the kind of thing where the state ought to come in and say to the board now, forgetting the religious, the pointing of fingers, and all the other things, you have an obligation to teach all children to do it responsibly. And I will say one more thing about it. This is not an easy task. These board decisions are made as a former board member on the Ramapo Central. They're made in committee meetings. They're made in principals in individual schools about who gets what, whether you get crayons, whether you get pencils, I mean, things of that nature. So it's a daunting challenge. The most optimistic or positive thing I think you could say about it is he emphasized that it's time to stop the finger pointing and become one community. How that is going to work is very difficult when you're dealing with an insular community like some of those there.
And Scott, sometimes these things are hard to get your hands around. This one, not so much. I mean, if you look at what's happening to the public school kids from, let's say, 10 years ago to now, the sports program's been cut to the bone. All the extracurricular activities have been cut to the bone here. The overcrowding in the classrooms. I mean, systematically, the cuts to the public school systems. And then what gets classified as private schools, that's where all the money goes. And how the buildings work and everything else. I mean, Dominic, your resident, this isn't some story that happened 2 months ago. This has been building up, and tensions have risen here as a consequence, haven't they?
I really believe it's almost criminal what's been going on for years. Because, I mean, you can't fault one community because they turn out and vote and put their people, for the most part, on the school board. But when the deck is stacked and it's only children from the Hasidim community that's benefiting taxpayer dollars, we're not talking about private dollars. This is all the pot from taxpayer dollars. 24,000 as the county executive, the wildly popular county executive. 24,000 kids, Hasidim, get to go to private school. 9,000 others go to public school. Better services, less services. Full disclosure, I went through the process that the county executive went through, because for my son, who you know has epilepsy, we were about to sue the school district with a lawyer and all because they declined us. So somehow 24,000 kids get accepted for private school, but if you don't have the right clout, then you're not one of those 24,000. It's that simple.
And I think overdue for a lot of reasons, from the practical, but also just from our reporting here, the tensions have escalated. And this, whether it be on religious lines, racial lines, have and have not lines, it's getting tense. And I think for that reason, as well as all the equitable reasons here, it's time somebody stepped in here, because something bad could have happened.
Well, I mean, it's volatile. And I mean, it is scary volatile in terms of potential for violence. And let me just say, it's not East Ramapo. The entire county community is watching this. And people, and it's not a good thing. I mean, it's divisive. People build up their opinions about the Hasidic communities, which in some cases are incorrect. On the other hand, you have this use of funds that is inappropriate, as Dominic points out. So, I mean, all throughout that county of Rockland right now, this is an underlying tension that is palpable.
Well, let me stay in Rockland, because the county executive there, your successor, Ed Day, he announced his $722 million budget plan for 2015. And the county of Rockland is facing the largest budget battle in the state, and not everybody, and that's putting it mildly, is happy about the county exec's plan here to close the gap. Under the proposed plan, 111 county jobs would be lost. Cuts would also be made to the sheriff's specialized forces, and the sheriff's patrol would suffer 37 layoffs. $3.3 million in funding for contract agencies, they'd also be eliminated. The sheriff, Sheriff FALCO, says the deep cuts to his department, they're the wrong way to go.
The Sheriff's Police Division was formulated overall back in 1957, where the Board of Supervisors came together and felt that they should have one unit of the county, namely the Sheriff's Office, do all the specialized functions, while the law enforcement in the towns and villages concentrated on their issues in their towns and villages, quality of life crimes, quality of life issues. That evolved into a BCI that was developed in 1958.
There is mission creep with the Sheriff's Department. It's trying to be all things to all people. What has to happen here is what's happening across county government. We need to restructure it. We need to have a department that reflects its core mission, which is protecting county property, which is civil service, and also the jails, the corrections. In addition, we want to maintain the service that the towns rely on, our bomb squad, a BCR, but they have to be trained. They have to be ready to go. We want to keep these things and make some sense of it. We believe we can interface better than the way we're doing it right now.
And we'll get to the public safety in a second, but also these cuts would have cut programs here in treatment for rape victims. $67,000 would be eliminated in funding for sexual assault services, and this comes as $55,000 assault grant is also being cut by the state's Department of Health. Officials say the county, they missed the deadline completely to apply for the grant that would have helped fund treatment and services for the sexual assault victims. You've heard both the county perspective and the law enforcement perspective. Who's right? I know there's tough decisions to be made, but is law enforcement right? There was other places they could have found this money?
You know, like all of these things, there's correctness in everybody's perspective to some extent. Remember that the sheriff's office, as with the contract agencies, is 100% taxpayer money. So if you're going to have to go after something, you go after those areas. I tried in a different way when I was there because we faced the same financial difficulties, obviously. So Ed Day is not wrong in trying to get to that area. The problem, of course, is often the civil service system because they have bumping rights. So you may take this person's job and pull it away, but he moves into the next job. He knocks the next guy out. So what's threatened is not just the patrol, it's the bomb squad countywide, it's the REACT unit for terrorism, it's the computer task force, which does a tremendous job in tracking down for both the feds, the state, and locally. Yeah. So you really have to be strategic in how you do this. Otherwise, the sheriff is correct. What happens is you begin to lose. You're just moving and bumping people. And oddly enough, the report that is being relied on talked about top-heavy management, not the sheriff's patrol, the people who are out there. The town supervisors are worried, and they're making the big argument that all you're doing is making a greater stress on the finances of the law enforcement of the towns. And I think there's a certain argument.
It all rolls downhill.
Yeah, right. I mean, to a certain extent, that's true.
Well, I think you would know that maybe it does need to roll downhill a little bit, and maybe the local guys need to do a better job with their local contracts. I mean, you have some of the highest paid police officers, and as a huge supporter of police departments, but you know, when some guys are averaging $150,000 a year, as you know, I mean, you're running a budget, and you know, and that's why Rob Astorino went through that in Westchester County. You have to get your arms around it at some point, or you're going to have a taxpayer revolt. And we can always make an argument at every level of government that this program we like, that program we like. Your job as a county executive is not easy because you have to cut programs when tax dollars aren't coming in.
I think it's about two things. We're going to hear from Rob in a little bit. I spoke to him yesterday. There were some interesting things he said both about the race, but also about. It seems to me there's two things at play. And first of all, the county screwed up. They didn't file to get the grant
That's
here.
Not the county. That's an agency.
The agency. I'm sorry. But nonetheless, here, you know, there are places to cut. You can argue. We've heard from the experts the holiday season and everything else with it coming up. Domestic violence may not be where you want to find savings. But put that aside. Nobody wants to raise property taxes anymore because if you want to keep your job, that's not the way to go. But you have these pension liabilities, and I mean, it's insane. The idea that you're going to borrow from your pension fund to pay your pension liabilities going forward, right. You know, makes no sense. But it's going on right now. It's going on in Westchester, I'm sure. And so nobody wants to talk about it because the eyes glaze over to the public about the pension liabilities, but that's real. And then property taxes, you do anything that raises a dollar of property taxes, you're the boogeyman. And as a consequence, you forget about cutting into fat, you're cutting into bone now.
Yeah, and I agree. But one of the things one has to remember is the county's portion of the property tax is 9% in Rockland County.
Nobody wants to hear that, though. Nobody wants to hear that. They're going to blame the county exec.
Number one. Number two, to Tom's point, which is accurate, I mean, the sheriff's department isn't paid like that. Those guys wish they could get onto the town police forces because they are paid. So the county really isn't overdoing it in that respect. So then you have to look at this trickle-down issue, which is very important. One other point, these contract agencies, they're all dismissed as contract agencies, but they are the arts, They are the culture, they are the health. This Center is the safety mechanism. It used to be Family Shelter, takes care of battered women at a time when this is a major issue across the country. So it's very hard being county executive. And look, I take the blame all the time for financial difficulties, but every year you go through trying to figure out how to do what you say, Rich, mandated costs, pension, Medicaid, you go right down the list, and where do you end up? Contract agencies and
Richard,
law enforcement.
But I'm going to state something that's not popular here. We love our law enforcement in Rockland County. I'm a longtime resident, been there more than 20 years. But the fact of the matter is, it seems that we have a duplication of services to a strong degree. In Rockland, you have the state police, which is right up the road from me. You have the local police, and then you have the sheriff. And so like many areas, it's a duplication of services. And so I've never met a police force, and they do an outstanding job every day, that say they can afford any type of cuts. So they ring the alarm whenever you state that they're going to be budget cuts, because they do not want to be cut.
I love your disqualifiers. You won't get pulled over on the way home tonight. All right. When we come back here, we're going to stay in the state of New York here and get some state issues and also city issues. We will head to the Big Apple, where Rachel Nordlinger, that embattled aide to the First Lady Charlene McRae, she's taking a leave of absence following yet another personal scandal that has been catapulted into the public eye. She says the attacks are a move to dismantle the de Blasio administration. Does she have a point here, or was this a long time coming? Our panel weighs in on that and more after this.